everyone! So I just did a 4 looks 1 palette video with the Natasha Denona Gold palette, and I asked if anyone would be interested in a review, and quite a few people were, so I thought that I would just do a fairly short and sweet one. There will be no demo in this because I did just do the 4 looks 1 palette, so if you are interested in seeing these shadows in action, I have the video linked down below. I am wearing the palette on my eyes today, of course, but I did not film this look. So anyway, let's talk about this palette because a lot of people are very curious about Natasha Denona eyeshadow palettes because they come with a pretty hefty price tag. And that has to be the first thing I talk about because it's really the first thing that most people talk about when they're talking about these palettes. So this is $129 US or $168 Canadian. Yes, this is not an inexpensive eyeshadow palette, to say the least. So to go over some of the details, which I'm pulling from the Beautylish website, and at least one of the things is wrong. So it's 15 eyeshadows in the palette. So this is what my palette looks like. It's a little bit dirty. I will say with the packaging, the way that this is, it's pretty easy to get this dirty and it's not very easy to clean it. So a lot of people like to clean their eyeshadow palettes. I am not one of those people. I will keep my makeup as clean and as sanitary as possible, but when it comes to actually like cleaning up the powder around the pans, I just don't care. Because as long as the shadows aren't transferring into the other pans, it's not going to affect the shadows, and I don't really care too much about what it looks like on the outside. It does have this little sheet in there as well with the shadow names on it. I'm not a big fan of this. I do like that it keeps the mirror separate from the shadows, so generally speaking, your mirror will be pretty clear, but I find that because of the way that it sticks up, I don't use this as a mirror because this just gets in the way and then everything's blurry anyway. I end up using a smaller mirror, which also usually tends to be a Natasha Denona one, but that's beside the point. So the packaging is very sturdy. The outside can get fairly dirty as well, smudgy with fingerprints. It's this beautiful reflective gold. So anyway, as I was saying earlier, 15 shadows in here, and they are 2.5 grams, or I also have the box, 0.08 ounces. This is the box it came in. I kept it because I figured I would probably do a review or talk about it. I normally just recycle all this stuff right away. And then all of the information, ingredients, and everything, even the shadow layout is very clear on the back of the box. So if you had any questions or concerns about the ingredients that were in here, if you happen to see this in store, you can really clearly see everything. Nothing is hidden. So on the Beautylish website, it says that it's paraben-free, talc-free, and cruelty-free. So it is paraben-free, it is cruelty-free, it is not talc-free. A number of the shadows actually have talc as their main ingredient, so just thought that I would mention that I thought that was strange that that was on the website, but then on the box, very clearly, a lot of the eyeshadows have talc in them. So I actually swatched the shadows in clusters of 5 based on their rows, row 1, row 2, and row 3. I will go through all of the shadows, their names, and what they are described as being and whether or not I agree with that description. So this is also coming from the Beautylish website, but this would have been supplied by Natasha Denona. So there are a number of different eyeshadow finishes. So on this little plastic sheet inside the palette with the shadow names, there's also a number followed by some letters. So for example, the first shadow, Lime Chrome, is called 194 DC. So DC stands for duochrome. So there's also creamy mattes, which are CM, sparkling shadows, which are a K, and then there's metallic shades, which are represented by an M, and then there are a couple of shades called CP, which I couldn't figure out exactly what CP meant. I did some searching and I couldn't find anything out. The only thing I could think of was maybe cream to powder, since a lot of the Natasha Denona, especially the mattes, tend to be a cream to powder formula. But I found that a little bit strange that it was with 2 shades. So this shade Python is a CP, and so is this golden shade right here, and that gold is Aurora. So I found that kind of strange because that's very much a metallic shadow, and that is a matte. So that's the only thing I can think of for definition of CP. If anybody knows for sure, please let me know. I couldn't find any information about that on the Natasha Denona website, just definitive things about the duochrome, creamy matte, sparkling, and metallic. All right, so row 1, we have lime chrome, which is 194 DC, described as a golden apricot with a green duochrome finish. This does have a very strong reflective sheen, and it looks beautiful on its own. It just really gives that subtle reflect that you don't have to like twist and contort yourself in so many different directions to make it have that reflect. Some duochrome shadows you really have to either layer it on top of other things in order to see it clearly, or it really only shows a different side of itself when it catches the light in a certain way. My experience with lime chrome is that it will work no matter what. You can mix it with things or layer it on top of its own, and it really brings something unique out of a lot of different shadows. Second shadow is Python 195 CP. This is a deep teal with a creamy matte finish. This shadow I find has applied really easily. I'm actually wearing lime chrome with this look as well, but I'm wearing a Python on the outer portion of my eye, and I find that it's very pigmented and it applies very easily, so you don't have to deal with a lot of building up of the shadow, and it's not patchy. It's just really good pigmentation, especially for a darker shadow. I do get a little bit of fallout with it, but nothing major. The third shadow is Sparks 196K. So this is a sparkling shadow. This is described as a sheer vanilla gold with a sparkling finish. So the sparkling shadows from Natasha are actually supposed to be sheer. I feel like a lot of people will swatch shadows like this and see how light it is and be very disappointed and like be expecting something more. It's not a highlight shade, so I do feel like that is missing from this palette. Sparks can definitely be used in that way, but it is a layering shadow, so it looks really pretty when you put it on top of other things or when it's slightly on top of other things. My favorite way to use it is as a brow bone highlight, but bringing it down on top of the other shadow so that it really seems to blend well together and you get that slight shimmery, glittery finish that reminds me a lot of like the filters that Pat McGrath uses on her Instagram videos. You just really get that in real life, that soft glitter. The fourth shadow, Aria 197 CM, is described as a warm pink beige with a creamy matte finish. This is a brown. There is at least one too many browns in this palette, matte browns, that look a little bit too similar. Now, I like this particular one for me personally because it's the lighter of the browns, and where I have fairer skin, I find that Aria is the brown that works the best for me when I want to do a simple transition shade. I haven't used it in any grand dramatic fashion. I found that it applied really easily. The thing with the mattes though is that they are very pigmented and you don't need to pick up a lot of product on your brush. I will talk more about the different formulas and my thoughts on them once I go through the different shades. But the next shade is Cava, and this is 198K. So this is another sparkling shade. This is described as a champagne gold with a sparkling finish. So this is fairly sheer for a gold, but it's nowhere near as sheer as Sparks is. I do find that Cava works really well on its own, but I also find that it's a really beautiful shade to blend in with other shadows. So if you had a gold on your lid and you didn't want to use a matte shade, you could use something like Cava to blend it together and blend it into the skin on your eyelid so that you don't have that just harsh line of gold to skin, unless that's what you want. But that's how I've been using it, mostly that way. I actually use a little bit of Cava for this look because I really like doing the whole shimmers in the crease thing, which is, I know, shocking and horrible, but I've been having a lot of fun playing with the different finishes in here because a lot of people will look at this and go, wow, there's a lot of similar shades in here, and there are a lot of similarities, but everything has a little bit of a different finish and everything works differently and works well together. So it's a very cohesive palette in that sense. So onto the second row, we have Aurora 199 CK. This is a peacock blue with a sparkling finish. So CK, that's another one that's different, that is somewhat in between sparkling and cream, so it's a cream to sparkling. I actually find this one to be fairly pigmented, and I have used it mostly on its own, and it is a little bit sheer, but it's not as sheer as I've heard other people describe it as being. I can definitely wear it on its own and not have any issues with it. It does pair very well with all the other shades, and it does look really interesting when you layer it on top of other shadows. I really like the way that it shimmers in there. I really enjoy that it has a little bit of more green to it. That's what I really enjoy about the blue green in this palette, is that they do tend to lean a little bit towards the green side, so it really flatters the gold shades in my opinion. The next shade is called Dijon 200 cm. This is a rich mustard with a creamy matte finish. I love that it's called Dijon. This is a beautiful, beautiful mustard eyeshadow. My best advice with that is be careful with how much you pick up on your brush, because it's really easy to go overboard. The next shadow is called Aurora. This is 201M. This is a warm gold with a metallic finish. So this shadow I thought I wasn't going to like, because I don't tend to like really warm gold shadows, especially ones that are very yellow gold. But this one has just enough orange in it that I find that it's a little bit more versatile than a straight up yellow gold, which doesn't flatter cooler skin tones in my opinion. And I also feel like it works better with me having blue eyes, so having a little bit of orange there makes that shadow a little bit more workable for me, and I've really been enjoying using it mostly as a highlight shade. So I'm wearing it on like my lower lash line right now for this look, and I like to pop it in the inner corner because I feel like it's really reflective and it just catches the light in such a beautiful way. The next shadow is Log, which is 202 cm. This is a dark brown with a creamy matte finish. It is exactly what it sounds like, but unlike other dark browns that can be really difficult to work with, this one, in my opinion, from using it quite a few times now, is that it works for everything, whether or not it's an all over the lid shade, or you're just using it as a liner, or if you're using it entirely in the outer crease, in the outer corner. For me, it works for everything. It's not patchy, it's smooth, it applies really easily, and it blends well with other shadows. And then the last one in this line is Varis, and this is 203M. This is a medium brown with a metallic finish. This is the like chocolatey bronze shade that I've been dreaming about. I've really wanted a brown shimmer. So many things pull in one direction or another, and this one is just straight up brown. It's not like it has a little bit of orange in it, and it's not like it's a little red or rusty. This is a brown. This is such a good shadow. It's good all over the lid. It's good for detail work. It's good in the outer corner. It's just one of the best shadows in here, but I find that in general the metallic formula is the best because it's just so smooth and so soft, and you barely need any product to apply it. You can apply it with your finger if you want to. When you swatch these ones, these are the ones that swatch the best, and you can feel them when you swatch them, that they're soft but they're not powdery. You don't get any kick up at all, and it's just sort of unbelievable. These are the shadows that like really sold me on Natasha Denona eyeshadow formulas. In the last column we have Brass, which is 204M. This is a green told gold with a metallic finish. Now this one is a little bit chunkier than the other metallics in here, and it can be easy to flake off a little bit if you pick up too much on your brush. I am wearing that mostly on my lid. I love how reflective it is. There's a little bit of green in there as well, so it works so well with the blue-green shadows and as well with lime chrome. Those are the mixture of shades I mostly have on my eye, and it works so well, but I don't like the chunkiness sometimes. You just definitely have to be careful with the kind of brush you use with that shadow. Next we have Sandstone, which is 205 cm. This is described as a cool yellow beige with a creamy matte finish. Now Sandstone and Teak, the two matte brown shades in this last row, I haven't used that often because I've been more into the other shadows. These are definitely good shadows to use in conjunction with the other shades, especially the golds, especially if you want to do something a little bit more wearable, a little bit more neutral, a little bit more everyday, but it still performs very well. Then we have Alchemist, which is 206M, a cool bronze gold with a metallic finish. This one has a little bit of yellow glitter in it, like really yellow gold glitter, and it's so unique. I've never seen a gold shadow that is on the cool end of the spectrum that also has some warmer glitter in it. It really gives a cool reflect on the eye. And then we have Teak 207 CM, a medium brown with a creamy matte finish. Almost indistinguishable from sandstone, when it's on your lid. It's really hard to tell the difference between the two of them, especially if you're just using them as crease shades. And then the last shade is Aurum, and that is 208 CP, a cool gold with a metallic finish. This seems to be, to me, the same metallic finish as like Varis, the brown bronzy shade. It applies so smoothly and it just goes on effortlessly. Like there's no working with these shadows, which is what makes them incredible. So for me, I tend to get about 7 to 10 hours of wear with these shadows. This depends entirely on activity level, weather, what the look is in general, because sometimes if it's a very simple look and I'm not packing on a lot of shadow and there's not a lot of shadow on my lid, it won't last as long. And if I have a lot of shadow on my lid, a lot of product, it tends to last longer and wear better, just for me and how I tend to wear things. So I have used this palette a number of times through my day-to-day life because I really wanted to play with it and I really wanted to test it out. So I got it, I ordered it the day it was released, and I got it a couple of days later. So I've been using it more or less every day. Pan that palette what? But I've been using it mostly every day just because I really wanted to get comfortable with it and to see if it was similar to the other ones I have, like the Sunset and the Lila, and it is. I find that the performance is just as good as those palettes. Another important thing I think to mention with this is that I don't need to use the metallic shades with anything else. I don't apply them with Fix Plus. I don't use any sort of base, any sort of glitter primer, any sort of layering product whatsoever. I just apply them on their own on top of my normal eyeshadow primer, which for me is the Urban Decay Eyeshadow Primer Potion. That is my go-to. That is the thing that I find works the best for me in terms of keeping my eyeshadow from creasing and keeping it in place the longest. So I find that I don't need to do anything to the metallics. I just put them on my lid. Some of them I need to build up a little bit more. Some of them I choose to build up because I like a little bit more intensity. I'm fairly used to spraying some Fix Plus and really having a very foiled look. And I wasn't quite sure at first. I couldn't get Fix Plus to work with the Natasha Denona metallic formula, but it really doesn't need it. Sometimes just a little bit extra layering. I do get a little bit of fallout from some of the shades, especially the ones that have a little bit more glitter. I think the brass shade is the worst culprit for me in terms of fallout, so definitely do your base makeup last if you can, just because sometimes the fallout can be a little bit difficult to clean up if it's pieces of glitter, but it depends on what you're applying the product with. Like I get more fallout if I'm applying a shimmery glittery shade with a fluffy crease brush, which makes sense. You're going to have more fallout if you're applying a shadow like that with a brush like that because of the way and the motion that you're using it. If I'm just packing it onto my lid, I get almost zero fallout. So just something I thought that I would mention. So sometimes with some glittery shadows, especially things that you might have to put on top of a glitter primer, or if you use Fix Plus with, once it starts to dry, sometimes it can start to crumble and you might get a lot of fallout, especially around this area. I don't notice any of that with any of the shades in this palette, and I've tried to wear them for as long as possible. I find that when they wear, they just fade and they don't just break apart and start to rain glitter down my face. So with the mattes, as I was mentioning earlier, they are very pigmented, but they're not soft or powdery like, in my opinion, Anastasia shadows are. Those are like the matte shadows that I have the hardest time working with because I find that even though there's a lot of pigment, they're very powdery and they can be hard to blend, at least the way that I want to. I find these work really well as long as I don't pick up too much product on my brush. It's really easy to go hard in a pan with the brush, especially if you're used to matte shadows that are harder, shadows that are pressed more firmly into pans. Think Too Faced, MAC, even some Urban Decay shadows, those matte ones, you might need to really go to town with your brush in the pan in order to get enough product to apply on your lid. With the Natasha Denona mattes, you don't need to do that at all. For me, there's no negatives, there's no downside to any of the Natasha formulas. They all work the way that I want them to, and they work well together. Some brands I feel like have good formulas that don't necessarily play well together, so you might have mattes and metallics that work better with different types. So some things can look really muddy if you put a lot of them together, and I don't have that experience with the Natasha Denona eyeshadows. I find that I can mix mattes and mattes and mattes and metallics and metallics and metallics and glitters and shimmers, and it doesn't matter what combination I'm using, they all work well together. Everything blends and nothing is standing out as being something that just doesn't work. It just feels very easy, and things don't take a lot of effort once you figure out kind of how much pressure you need to put and how much time you need to spend. Once you kind of get that down, it takes no time at all. It's really easy to use these shadows. So I did have very high expectations when I ordered this palette. I was expecting it to be very good, and that can be a good and bad thing because I knew that any little thing was going to really disappoint me with this palette, and nothing did. Now, I do wish there was some minor variations with the shade ranges, especially when it comes to those matte brown shadows. I get why they're there. They're just not my preferences. I would have loved to seen a matte orange or a matte yellow, and maybe a really deep green, like a deep forest green. I think that would have been so complimentary in this palette because I feel like it's missing a little bit more uniqueness in the matte shades. The mustard shade is perfect. I love the deep brown, but it would be so nice to have a deep rich green, almost black. Black would work well with this palette, but I feel like a almost black, but that still had a little bit of green to it. Even if it was like a slight hint of shimmer in there, I think it would be just absolutely beautiful. But there's nothing wrong with this palette at all. I personally really love it because these are the kind of shades that I gravitate towards. You know, this is definitely something that I'm going to get a lot of use out of because I love every single shade in this palette. And that would be my best advice if you are considering a Natasha Denona eyeshadow palette, is to make sure you are interested in every single shade. I think once you start knocking shades off as ones you would definitely never use, and be realistic, ones you would never use, the value isn't there anymore. And then the value is only going to be there if you believe an eyeshadow palette could be worth that much money. If you already believe that there's no way an eyeshadow is going to be worth that kind of money, then don't spend it, because you will be disappointed and you won't enjoy it. It is very much a luxury item. It's not a necessity, and I think that's something very important to remember, that it's eyeshadow. So if you have the money to spend on it, if you want to spend the money on it, then I would say that this is a very, very good palette for a lot of people who would be getting into Natasha Denona, who want to maybe try it out. I know there's a lot of similar shadows out there as well. You probably have a lot of things in your collection that could dupe that, so be aware of what you already have before you think about buying something, especially something so expensive, if you can already create looks that would look like they came from this palette. So there definitely is some differences in terms of formula, in terms of finishes. You probably already have some golds in your collection from some other palettes. These particular finishes are going to be different than those, but that doesn't mean anything. If you already have gold shadows you love using that apply and work well for you, then you don't need another palette. The only shadow in here that I would say is pretty much impossible to dupe is Lime Chrome. The Natasha Denona duochrome shadows are incredibly unique, but that's one shadow in a palette of 15. So I wouldn't say buy a palette for one single shadow. You know, it's definitely not a $168 shadow on its own. So just something to keep in mind if you are thinking about any expensive makeup purchase, particularly an eyeshadow palette, is just to make sure that you are really wanting it and you are really going to use the whole thing. Anyway, so I hope that was helpful and hopefully answered some of the questions you may have had about this palette. If you have any questions for me, if you would like to know some more information, just leave me a comment down below and I will get back to you as soon as I possibly can. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope we get a chance to chat soon. Bye for now.